Good afternoon from India, but a good morning to our friends in Africa. I'm so happy that we are all at Sankalp Africa Summit today, and we are going to be discussing important subjects like the building Africa's industries to global competitive levels. I'm very happy that on today's panel, I have the president of the Trade and Development Bank, Dr. Admasu Tadese, and Dr. Mehbooba Diane, the vice president of EBIT, the ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development. Ato RKB should be joining us in a while. It is so wonderful that we can discuss this theme today with optimism, despite the pandemic, which has created a negative feeling generally across the globe. And I think part of this credit goes to Africa, which has kept at implementing the Africa Continental FTA, which was agreed in 2019-20 and has, despite the pandemic, been brought into force in every way possible. Of course, this is the dynamic process and it will go through, but meanwhile, nobody waits for completion of processes. We start engaging when the process is there because we are all part of the process. So today, I welcome you to Sankalp Africa and to say how happy I am to engage with you. The idea basically today is like this. How do leverage the Africa Continental FTA and the post-pandemic situation to obtain more investment in Africa? Certainly trade will be facilitated, but how do we get more FDI? Because the biggest advantage which is going to be coming out of the FTA is the development of regional markets. And these regional markets, though essentially for trade, will also be the dynamic creators of regional markets which will attract FDI. Now, in this, I believe both our panelists have a very critical role because they lead very important regional development banks, the Trade and Development Bank for the COMESA region and the ECOWAS region from EBIT. And both of them have also been very good partners of India. So I am going to open the floor with the president of the Trade and Development Bank, Dr. Admasu Tadese, and ask you, how do you see the prospects for from your perspective of a regional bank on these themes?
Well, thank you, Ambassador. Very much a pleasure to be in this summit and to have this occasion to explore not just the issues within the African space, but also the interrelationships perhaps with Asia and India. Just very quickly, Ambassador, just to say the Trade and Development Bank has already been going through a very strong journey of growth for a good decade on the back of the strong growth we'd all been seeing in the continent. And so already we have been benefiting from strong economic growth, which, as you know, relies heavily on trade and investment. And so we have played a very instrumental role in that. And now we see, of course, the trade side of things very likely to get a boost. It won't be immediate, but it will definitely pick up steam. And that steam will really generate a number of benefits for the quality of our growth and the quality of our trade. And I say this because at the moment, I think most would know that the intra-regional trade levels within Africa are quite low compared to other regions of the world. We're looking at 15% of Africa's trade being intra-regional in nature. You look at Asia or Europe, it's 3-4 times that number, 50, 60, 70%. So of course, when crises hit the world, what happens is global trade quickly contracts. And it also creates additional vulnerabilities to Africa not to have strong intra-regional trading. Of course, Africa has an agenda of trade and growth involving the whole world, but there's a great deal to be done within the region. And I think this is why you made references to the two banks on the show today. who have a role to play to stimulate that cross-border trade. But of course, that is more an outcome than it is just an objective as such, because to get that trade moving, you need to achieve two very important things. One, of course, is you need to ensure that there is complementarity in what is produced in Africa. There's value addition, so that not everybody's producing the same raw material that's not value added. But of course, for the goods to move efficiently, you need to have infrastructure. So that's the two I's that are very important in this agenda. The industrialization that will come on the back of infrastructure. But then there's a third I, which is often not given enough attention, and that is what I call institutions. Institutions are the ones who ensure that the software, the interconnectivity of trading regimes and all of the non-tariff barriers can be unlocked to produce that movement. So the three I's are going to be the focus now for the years to come. And I think that will help us unlock this huge potential.
Thank you. I now put the same question to the Vice President of EBIT. Sir, how do you think that the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and the post-pandemic situation can be leveraged for obtaining more investment in Africa, particularly in your area, and from your point of view of your bank?
Many thanks, dear Ambassador. If you allow me, first of all, to thank you on behalf of our President, Dr. George Dankor, but also to the opportunity also to thank President Atmatsu, who made me a development banker. I am very grateful for the support that Atmatsu has given me. He's one of the greatest banking leadership that I have seen in Africa since I returned from Europe. And thank you. Now, the question you are asking is a very interesting question for two reasons. From an experience point of view, the last 8 months, which is more or less inside COVID and more or less at the outcut of COVID, we have seen very, very interesting dynamics in West Africa. We have seen Europeans coming with a very different angle of ECA financing. And we have also seen Europeans coming, partnering with global regional African corporates to do businesses in Africa. And what do I mean by that? Today, I give you an example. Germany has given us close to $300 million the last 7 months, solely based on ECA financing, partnering with global companies like El Suidi in building power plant, transmission line, and even sometimes dry ports in Africa. And now the opportunities that I'm seeing during COVID and post-COVID is exactly what President Atmatsu said about industrialization, the beneficiation of agri-commodities. But alongside that, have also what President Atmatsu said about the software that gonna boost, that gonna ease the industrialization, which is basically the institutional capacities. Today, I have seen economic diplomacy has a vital, let's say, a tool, a very important recipe to link Africa with India, to link Africa with the rest of the world. And I give you another small example. We are currently in very, very advanced conversation with the India Exim Bank, who are talking about, let's say, butter trade, but not only butter trade in the sense of exchanging raw commodities, but also expanding expertise to beneficiate certain products and add some value before it is exported. The free trade arrangement that exists today between the African countries not only could boost the industrialization of Africa, but also could reduce the import bills. When, let's say, West Africa order fertilizer from Indorama, which is although an Indian company, but with subsidiaries in Senegal, with subsidiaries in Nigeria, when those two African countries sell fertilizer to other African countries, they don't pay tax. Yeah. The Indian expertise also is coming to boost. How do they, let's say, beneficiate the phosphate that they have, turn it into fertilizer to boost agriculture, to reduce the import bill. Reason why I really believe that what President Atmos said is very, very spot on. The two I and also economic diplomacy would be definitely something that would boost the industrialization of the country, of the continent, let's say, during and post-COVID. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy you mentioned Indorama because when I was in Indonesia, they were headquartered there and they were making some new investments in Africa, and I had much to do in giving them some positive feedback. So I think not only Nigeria, but they have made investment in Senegal into the old fertilizer thing. So I think they are really expanding, which is very good. And they are doing it in areas where normally Indian businesses didn't come. So I think that is also a progress. And you're right. I think they benefit from the FTA because the regional market will open to them to provide low-cost movement of goods and services into your own region. I appreciate Ato Admasu's, the three I's. And one of the I's, the industrialization, and the other one, the institutional capacity, say, of your bank. Now, we believe that in the current phase, and now with the FTA there, Africa would like to move from debt to investment. So I think the debt stress, which lots of countries have lent to Africa, is leading to a greater emphasis on more FDI and PPP models, which means more private sector involvement of companies from India and globally. Now, sir, from your bank, how do you facilitate the private sector to come to your region?
Well, thank you for the question, Ambassador. I think you've really hit the nail on the head in terms of what the direction is going forward. I think we all know that the key to sustainable growth and transformative growth is volume, but also quality. So we know that we have fixed capital formation levels that are still not high enough to drive the 6% magic growth number that we know is critical to start lifting significant Africans out of poverty. So we know that investment can be both domestic and foreign in nature. And I think what has become very clear is the public infrastructure drive that's been financed with the fiscus has had a great run, but it's probably reached some limits now. And it's very clear now that going forward, the various economies that are really committed to growing need to start creating an ecosystem that will make it productive and profitable for private investment to flow in. And that private investment is going to have to flow into many different sectors. But we know that infrastructure is a very big ticket sector. And we know that there's been liberalization in the infrastructure space that has demonstrated the possibilities. They're actually very inspiring when you look at the telephony sector. Mobile telephone companies in Africa 20 plus years ago were hardly here. And 2 decades later, I mean, Africa has leapfrogged in a huge way. And almost all of that has been driven by the private sector. So that's the ICT sector. Now we're seeing this move to the power sector. And now the power sector has been unbundled, and we have a lot of open stances, a lot of willingness, a lot of exciting opportunities in IPPs, independent power producers. So that's just one subsector of the infrastructure space that is becoming very amenable for private investment. It's been already done in many countries. We have PPPs that have been implemented in many different countries now. So that is very clearly a stance and a policy posture that most African economies or countries have been taking to continue driving growth through higher levels of investment that doesn't stress the public fiscus. Now, of course, what does this mean practically? It means confidence building, it means facilitating investment, and it means ensuring that the investment climate is suitable. And this is, again, coming back to that I, right? So the institutions have a very, very important role to play. It's not just the tariffs or the tax rates, but it's also just around logistics and how quickly bureaucracy moves and how streamlined movement is of goods and services. Sometimes in African countries, you'll find that the competitiveness, the cost structures of Africa are actually very appealing. But the minute you leave the factory floor, what you would discover, the inefficiencies mount very quickly. And by the time you're hitting the ports and ready to start shipping the goods, your competitiveness has been completely eroded. You've lost competitiveness. And this is why the infrastructure and the institution aspects become very, very important, because you can push industrialization, but if you don't have the software and the ecosystem amenable and working in tandem, you'll have a lot of frustration. And we've seen this in a number of African countries where there was very large scale, hard investments in infrastructure, the roads, the power sector, rail, and all of that. But the software that ties it all together has been so weak. And you've almost had gridlock in a number of countries where, you know, you don't even feel the presence of this hard infrastructure. It's there, but nothing moves. And so this is really the premium going forward. I think governments have to really pay close attention to making sure that the environment is functional and productive, not just what happens on the factory floor.
I think you make a very valid point. The trade facilitation, which needs to get on. And I think that also includes things like customs facilitation, so that the time taken to clear containers and move them, all that needs to be, then automated movement of containers onto trains and trucks. And I think this whole ecosystem, which also is actually attraction for new investments. I come to you, sir. In West Africa, in ECOWAS particularly, how does your bank facilitate the private sector, and what is your experience with what Ato Admasu just said about the trade facilitation segment?
Look, if you see today what is happening, and most of our governments and member countries are very close to their debt ceiling, debt borrowing capacity. For me, there is no other choice than involving private sector to get the major things done. And if you see what is happening in the power sector, especially on the generation side, more and more you see big mega projects being done, being originated, being structured, being financed by the private sector through the IPP model. I think that the concept of IPP in the power sector could also be, migrated into the transmission line sector. And there are tremendous opportunity there. Today, when I say a relatively poor country like Guinea-Conakry, the Chinese have built 2 large hydropower plants. Guinea-Conakry is connected to the West African power pool. By just motivating Indian companies to come and build the transmission lines that are gonna connect those 2 hydropower plants to the West African power pool. Maybe it will not be an IPP, it will be an independent transmission company where you just charge a tolling fee for each kilowatt that you transport, you generate revenue, you generate EBITDA, at the same time you unlock the opportunity of the power sector. This is number 1. Distribution. More and more we see in Africa, governments, private sector talking about origination and transmission, but we know that there are distribution challenges in Africa. The power that is produced, the power that is transmitted, may not reach the end consumer who is paying the bill, because just over the last 30 years, nobody has invested in the distribution network.
Yes.
Reason why I strongly believe that a PPP model or a BOT model, where Indian companies, global companies bring 15, 20, 30% of equity, or even sometimes they could do part equity, part mezzanine, to unlock the senior debt that you could rise through ECA financing. Why? Because you are importing the cables from ABB, you are importing the cable from General Electric, from South Korea, from Japan. I think there is an amazing opportunity there for global corporate, Indian corporate, to come and do not only debt only, equity investment / mezzanine investment with a relatively earned return on capital. And this would not only help to address one of the eyes that President Ahmad said, which is the infrastructure part, because without that, it will be very, very difficult to boost the industrialization of the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So that leads me to the next question, that certainly in the infrastructure part and the related parts have now in Africa much greater scope for the private sector involvement. You are getting ECA and support rather than raising your debt. You are ready to have more equity and PPP models, which means that the trade facilitation, which Ato Agmase just mentioned, is now a focal point of private sector and PPP engagement. But I now bring you to the smaller person, the small and medium enterprise. Now, after all, they are the ones who are going to create the jobs in things like agro processing or textiles or related issues. So how do your banks support the SMEs in Africa? May I ask Professor Dr. Tadesse to please start?
Yes, thank you again, Ambassador. I think you've turned now to a topic that is very close to the hearts of DFIs, naturally, because we know what SMEs mean for the quality of development. Because without SMEs, you'll have jobless growth. If it's just big extractive sector type investments that have been the history of many African countries, that's not really what produces large-scale jobs. And we know that the vast majority of Africans are employed in the SME sector.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start talking about regional banks and DFIs, how do they support this very important segment of the economy, which from an impact perspective has a very, very big contribution? The answer would be it depends on your positioning. So typically, if you look at the DFIs that are working within the borders of a country, that work with local currency typically and have significant networks in terms of branches or regional offices within a country, they are in a better position to provide direct services to SMEs. As you would know, from an industry perspective, the challenge of SMEs has always been the cost to serve and the ability to serve. It's not just about money, it's about having the networks and the presence on the ground to actually work with these numerous enterprises. And so typically what you'll find is regional bodies like ours, for instance. What we would do is we would identify financial institutions within countries that are already well established on the ground and have that ability to provide retail-like outreach that is being on the ground in the local areas where typically SMEs reside. And so what we will typically do is we'll give some of our financial firepower. We'll give credit lines to these intermediaries within countries. And in some cases, we'll actually tell them, look, what you're doing is great. We think you should do more of that. Now, we can't come in and physically do what you're doing, but what we can do is we can give you partial guarantees and tell you we will share the risk of your portfolio. So do twice as much as you're doing tomorrow as you from today, and we will cover the risk. So that also helps deal with the difficulty of mismatch of currency, because as you would know, regional and continental type financial institutions like ours, we're not local currency denominated, right? So we tend to work in harder currencies. Not that we cannot work in local currency, we do that from time to time. But even when we do local currency lending, it's typically on larger scale basis because we're wholesale banks, right?
Yeah.
So as a wholesale entity, what you're best able to do is to provide credit and then, of course, participate in the risk and give guarantees and enable the institutions that are doing this well to do much more by helping share their risk and giving them the comfort to actually scale up. And so I think these are two specific areas. The other areas, of course, is blending, where you can actually provide special purpose funding that is not credit in nature. It could be technical assistance to help institutions with training, building their business models and strengthening their institutional framework.
Mhm.
But also at the same time, you can give grants where you can actually help subsidize on a very targeted basis specific types of segments of the SME community, especially the startups. And those grants can also be around creating hubs so that the smaller guys who don't have institutional infrastructure and who don't have functional capabilities, having legal firms, having accounting firms, having IT services, having facilities. You give a plug and play type of platform so that
Mhm.
SMEs can focus on the production, which is what they're very good at. And then you ensure that the ecosystem around them is facilitated and it's enabled so that they don't have to spend too much on setting up their enterprise systems, if you like. So there's many different ways of supporting them, and these are just some of the key thrusts. But I'm sure my good colleague Dr. Mabuba will add to this.
Thank you so much for explaining this so well. I am going to go to Dr. Bebuba, but before that, I would like to welcome Dr. Arkebe Okube, one of Africa's leading academics and intellectuals, an old friend, senior minister of Ethiopia, special advisor to the Prime Minister, and now the African Union approved candidate for the Director General of UNIDO. We welcome you, sir, and wish you well. Do you mind if I just go back and complete the earlier question before I come to you? So I now go to Dr. Mehbooba. So taking off from where your colleague from the TDB left off, the role of the private sector, especially the SMEs, and he mentioned startups. How do you facilitate them from your bank?
Many thanks, Ambassador. Besides the on-lending and the blending that President Atmatsu said, we are also here implementing what we call an integrated end-to-end industrialization strategy. And let me maybe just illustrate how do we finance the SME ecosystem. If I take an example of the poultry industry.
Yes.
We take, for example, Guinea-Conakry again. They import 50 million euro of poultry. You take Ghana, they import $300 million of poultry. $50 million of poultry import at the price of $2 per chicken is 25 chicken.
Mm-hmm.
25 chicken, if you take 2 kg every chicken, it's 50 million kg of chicken. 50 million kg of chicken, if you work on an index of 1.5, which means that to produce one kg of chicken, you need 1.5 kg of feed, and the feed is nothing else than maize and soya. To produce that 50 million kg of meat, you need 150 million kg of feed. And you need 150,000 tons of maize and soya. You can now take, if you take the yield, the African yield, which is 5 hectares, 5 tons per hectares, you can create 30,000 jobs of SME jobs that just grow soya and maize, plus the thousands of jobs that are going to grow the chicken, the oven, the hatchery, the abattoir, and the distribution. By just solving an end-to-end industrial park with the agri-ecosystem that President Atmatsu said, not only you are reducing the import bill of 50 million a year, you are also creating 31,000 jobs, SME jobs, what I call the agripreneurs. And President Atmatsu said something very, very, very important about creating an enabling environment that would prevent the SMEs to set their own infrastructure. One, not only they don't have the expertise, they don't have the capital, and they don't have the depth of knowledge. But by now bringing these integrated end-to-end industrial parks, I think that you enable the SMEs, let's say, to have more chances of succeeding. It's basically taking the SME, plugging them into an ecosystem of a machine that works already, where they are just part of the value chain. Yes, that works, but as President Atmatsu said, partnering with local bank on an on-lending program, partnering with ECA, partnering also with microfinance institutions, because those people, more and more I see that they are becoming more specialized, and they tend to understand the last mile SMEs better than traditional banks because of the way they have been governed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I know that where the integrated parks are concerned, Ethiopia has a very large number of parks, and I think they have followed this policy with great care and meticulousness to great success. So I'm very happy now to turn to Ato Arkebe. Sir, welcome. And I give you the floor to please give us your vision on this subject of how we can use the post-pandemic situation, the continental free trade area, the fact that you could very soon be the DG of UNIDO. How can we help to make Africa more industrialized?
Thank you, Ambassador. My very old friend, almost 20 years back, our friendship goes back, and I'm very, very impressed by your energy, Ambassador, the same energy that I saw 20 years back. And I congratulate you for organizing this important summit. And this is an example of the importance of South to South relations, because India and Africa should closely work together. And I should also highlight and mention Ethiopia is one of the countries that is attracting massive FDI from India, and I have always been impressed by Indian farmers. They are resilient and they have usually tried to integrate with the community. Coming back to the question Ambassador laid, the first point is, as we are talking about African economic growth and development, it's good to put as a starting point, highlighting that Africa is moving, because there is a confusion and misperception that all the crises are in Africa. But what many of us may not be able to understand is this continent first is diverse. The same population like India, we have more than 50 countries. And then each country is very, very diverse. My country has more than 80 nationalities. Nigeria even has more diverse. So understanding this diversity is absolutely important. The second aspect is that the economic growth in Africa, the traction has been increasing from time to time. After political independence in the 60s, many African countries were moving relatively faster. And then this growth, which we usually call it golden decades, for more than 2 decades there was growth. And then after the mid 80s and 90s, what we usually call the time of Washington Consensus, many countries, their growth didn't accelerate. Actually, it decreased. And since the new millennium, African countries, the growth rate has been increasing, and roughly it has been about 4 to 5% in the last 2 decades. So something is happening in this continent, and there are also important hot spots or bright spots like Ethiopia. Ethiopia in the last 25 or 30 years have been able to accelerate its growth. For about 15 years, economy has been growing by 10.5% every year, and having one of the lowest average life expectancy, which was 44 in 1990. In about 25 years, average life expectancy increased to by 22 years, which is twice Africa's average. So this is putting the context. Then coming up to what also my good friend and brother Admasu and also Dr. Mabubu were mentioning, for Africa's industrialization, the first thing we need to put as starting point is we need to primarily orient ourselves on economic diversification, economic transformation. We have seen during the COVID-19, countries that were hardly hit were countries that didn't diversify the economy. And African countries were also significantly affected by the economic recession. The economy contracted by 4%. So this is very, very important. Oil-rich countries, as far as they only focus on oil, they will not be able to sustain growth. So this is the starting point. This brings us to the importance of manufacturing, importance of industrialization. And India is a good example where manufacturing and industrialization has really received much more attention. We could see India built a very strong pharmaceutical industry. India has been able to strong ICT industry, chemical industry. So in these topics, in these areas, Africa needs to focus first, attracting productive investment. Again, I'm not saying FDI per se, I'm saying productive investment. And what this really means is we need to target companies, we need to target manufacturing plants to invest in Ethiopia and other African countries so that they can benefit from available trained workforce and also growing market. And this is very, very critical. In the last 10 years, Ethiopian government has been able to attract $25 billion of FDI, and 80% was in manufacturing. So we need this so that we can develop domestic capability and domestic linkages. And we cannot separate small enterprises, medium enterprises survive on their own without being linked to such global companies. The second aspect we need to focus is creating industrial ecosystem, which you clearly highlighted and also Brother Admasu emphasized. Ethiopia's approach has been in Africa. Actually, in India, the first park was built in 1960s. In Africa, 1970s, including Mauritius and Senegal. There was not a single industrial park until 2010 in Ethiopia. When you were ambassador in Ethiopia, there was no park. So yes, the government of Ethiopia, what it did was, it didn't just start and jump it on building industrial parks. It decided in 2012, we need to understand why it's important to expand industrial parks, how it should be done right, how it should also support industrialization. So we focused and studied 7 countries. We studied Nigeria and Mauritius from this continent. We critically studied Singapore, China, Vietnam, Taiwan, and South Korea. And based on this understanding, we designed a new approach that will help us to develop and accelerate industrialization in a relatively shorter period. We have seen in Africa industrial parks that took 20 years to build. This is not going to help us. We don't have 5,000 years to industrialize. So a new approach was applied that focuses on specialized industrial parks, on green industrial parks, on creating all government services one-stop in the parks. And we didn't jump in, we may have beautiful policy, but first you need to test it. So we tested it in Hawassa Industrial Park, industrial city. So we believe we are on the right track, and Ethiopia is developing a new generation of industrial parks, because we shouldn't build what we are going to destroy tomorrow for environmental reason or for substandard industries. So industrial ecosystem, manufacturing cannot grow, cannot develop without an ecosystem. But it also needs to be linked with infrastructure development, with expansion of training in human capital. It needs also to be linked with stable macroeconomy. So these are the main focus. I should, if you allow me, Ambassador, I would like to highlight about African continental free trade area, which is a major success for this continent. I want to emphasize 3 points. First, the African Continental Free Trade Area is a result of 50 years of the continent's journey of economic integration. OA was established in 1963. Africa Union was established end of 90s. There was a lot of transformation, and regional economic communities were also operating, COMESA, SADC, ECOWAS, etc. So they were experimenting, and gradually this has evolved. Without that historical background, it would not have been possible. We should also understand that African free trade, there is a lot of euphoria now. We need to understand this is not a destination, it's a starting point. Because free trade, in order to benefit the continent, we must be able to produce goods to be traded. Currently, all manufactured goods are being imported. So this should be an incentive, this should be a pulling factor to industrialize and to add value and to manufacture. So this here, industrialization becomes critical. The second element is the importance of connectivity and infrastructure. Without infrastructure, without connectivity, will not be able to benefit much from this free trade, because the cost of transportation, trade, connectivity will be high. So African countries need to work on it. The demand is significant every year. The continent is going to need $150 billion to build infrastructure. So it has to prioritize, but it has to be linked with that. The third element is this must also be linked with harmonization of customs, cross-border operations, trade facilitations, and also peace and stability across borders. Lastly, although African continental free trade is important, intra-trade in Africa is only 15%, in contrast to Europe or ASEAN. But the most important element is Africa plays a marginal role in global trade. It's about 3%. So we shouldn't only think about reaching 60% of this 3%. The more important strategic issue is how can this pie be bigger? How can Africa's contribution in global trade increases from time to time? So these are important issues. On the UNIDO aspect, if you give me second round, I can come back to that.
Okay, thank you so much. As always, you are very precise and clear, and you got your points laid out. And I think all the colleagues on the panel actually agree with you. We have been through this, and I think we all agree that this is the approach. So let me now go to all of you mentioned green and sustainable development. Now, achieving the sustainable development goals is the responsibility of all institutions, whether private or government. So in the field of business, to achieve SDGs, this is what I think now we call impact investment. And this Sankalp Africa Summit actually focuses a lot on impact investment. So I want to now touch upon this, and how, keeping in the background what we have discussed today, how do we try and help the impact investment into Africa, which will help the SME, help the SDGs, and create jobs? May I start with the president of the TDB first, sir?
Thank you, Ambassador. For sure, I think the evolution of the investment community has been quite impressive around the ESG asset class, if you like. I think there's been a great deal of enthusiasm around changing the pattern of investment to deal not just with the environmental challenges, but of course to ensure higher impact on the social side. Of course, it's an industry that has grown dramatically. It's estimated to be worth almost $500 billion today, over 1,000 organizations participating in this space. So there's a great deal of funding, and I think the appetite has grown over the years, especially with the arrival of the SDG agenda, which of course came with a very strong perspective on private participation in development financing. And so the ESG space has become very prominent, and we're seeing all sorts of innovations come through in terms of bonds. For instance, you have you have green bonds, you have social bonds, you have SDG bonds, and so there's this great need to be associated with investing with a purpose. And so this is relatively young in the community of investment, and I think we've seen very big strides being taken. But of course, it's one thing to talk about the outline of this segment of the investment community, but the reality, of course, is there's still so much to be done. There's still a big issue around risk appetite. As you know, most African countries are not investment grade, and a lot of impact investors, as much as they want to make a contribution on the E side and the S side, they still need financial returns, right? So it's always a triple bottom line play. How do you ensure that you deliver on the value proposition in its complete sense? And so nobody will do S and G unless the financial returns are there as well. And so I think as one promotes the prospects of impact investing, I think governments need to make sure that there is an ecosystem and an investment climate that is well designed to help ensure that there is a certain amount of success on the financial side. Because if you have grants or if you have public development programs, you can always maximize on the social impact and the environmental impact. But we know that the scale is only going to work if you bring in private investment, because we know taxpayer-based funding is quite limited. And I think this takes me back to my earlier point, Ambassador. I think we've seen a lot of push being made around getting the volumes through. Of course, there's been a lot of debt that's accumulated over the years as part of addressing this important infrastructure question. But the real issue, of course, is the productivity of that investment, right? So I think, for instance, on the infrastructure side, one of the big issues that are being debated in the industry is all this public sector driven infrastructure. Is it producing fruit immediately? Are we seeing returns coming through from that infrastructure? Because the infrastructure is an enabling asset class. It doesn't actually produce a whole lot on its own, right? And so I think there is where countries like Mauritius, as Arkaba, my good friend, has mentioned, has done really well, and so has Rwanda. These are small countries that have actually understood the power of the investment climate, the power of making sure that doing business is efficient. I think this is where a lot of other countries have a lot to learn, to make sure that you don't put such a huge premium on getting big volumes of funding to come through, but you have gridlock, institutional gridlock. Things don't move. The logistics is a nightmare. And I think this ends up giving a bitter taste in the mouth of investors, because nobody wants to get stuck in that kind of situation where the investment climate doesn't enable you to get a reasonable return on your investment. And I think the continent has been pushing investment climate. We have rankings. We have the world is quite aware of which African countries have a fairly attractive investment climate and which ones don't. And I think that's the litmus test for me, because I've always believed that the one thing that Africans have control over is their institutions. You don't need outsiders to come in and put billions of dollars into your institutional space. And that should be the one thing that you should fix on your own before you start asking the rest of the world to come to the party. And I think, again, this is where the countries like Mauritius and Rwanda and Botswana and others have really made sure that they've led by proving the point themselves. Because I think the problem with money, being a banker, is the money can flow, but what happens when it's flowed, right? If the experience is not a good one, it becomes a very negative signal to future investors.
Very, very interesting what you said, sir. Certainly, the balance has to be maintained between our environment and us, as well as our money and us. So all this needs to be balanced, and we hope that the expansion of the impact investment movement will help in getting all this going. I turn to the Vice President of EBIT now, sir. from the point of view of your institution, do you have a window to support SDGs, ESGs, impact investment, or in what way can you help in this?
Many thanks, Ambassador Geng, and thanks to our two colleagues, President Admatsu and Honorable Minister Arkebe. Again, today, if you take West Africa, and Africa in general, the food import bill is around $35 billion. If you do nothing, by 2035, it's going to be $125 billion. I say this is more than enough to resolve the unemployment problem in Africa. But as President Admatsu rightly said it, if you let capital to flow, and those people who bring the capital do not have good experiences, there is no second round of flow.
Mm-hmm.
Today, having a solar-powered borehole at a village around a mine can not only create jobs, because people can grow vegetable and sell it to the mine to feed the workers.
Mm-hmm.
It can create powers to lighten the village, and it can elevate the poverty of those people. These are very simple things where sustainable impact and development financing is creating jobs, feeding the people, reducing the import bill. Reason why I do really agree with what President Admatsu said about institutional capacity. Today, the problems that Africa are facing are so simple to resolve if there is a serious political drive and a little bit of organization and institutional capacity. Money will flow because money is like water. They will live where there is abundance, and they will flow where it is needed. When I see Europeans, even the US, where interest rates are trading around almost at zero level, and when you see, power plant being financed at a 7%, 7.5% level, you know that there is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I strongly believe that today, young global Africans who have traveled around the world, worked around the world, have gathered a little bit of capital, should and must come back into their countries and starting those small enterprises that, let's say, Ethiopia has done in a well-organized industrial park, and look at things in a very sustainable manner. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So before I come to Ato Arkebe, after my retirement, one of the things which I got involved with, because it impresses me, is this impact investment movement. Because in India, in Southeast Asia, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, and now in Africa, the parent company of the organizers of this event are running funds to support impact investment. And it is they have almost $1 billion under AUM. And they are, for instance, supporting plastic recycling, women's education, women's empowerment, dealing with agricultural producers, fintech, and many other things, exactly what our two other panelists have said. And they are finding small funds to support these people who don't have to borrow, but get investment from this fund to support them. And the risk, of course, is with the fund. So far in India, they have made profits, and we hope they continue to do so, because they're also involved in the MFI movement. And the MFIs in India, many of them are now becoming small banks. They are being encouraged to become banks. So that movement seems to be going well. Sir, I would like to ask you, since you know so much about Africa, both politically and economically, where do you see this impact investment fitting in with your plans for the development of Africa?
Yeah, good. Let me also link this with the previous question you raised. Mm-hmm. A central challenge and opportunity, and also on the core concept of economic transformation in Africa has to boil around job creation. But when we say job creation, we have to think about productive jobs, not informal sector is a reality, but we shouldn't consider it as the model because what is important is jobs that would create sustainable incomes that will also be linked with upgrading of skills. So I'm talking about job creation to be core to the challenge of all developing countries. How do you create jobs is a key issue. So if you look from the broader historical perspective, agriculture may create jobs, but gradually as agriculture productivity increases, less people will be depending on it, but its output and productivity will increase. And every year, jobs are, the population is expanding. The current population of this continent, our continent, is close to 1.3 billion.
Yes.
By 2040, from 4 inhabitants of our planet, 1 will be African. It will be 2.5 billion. So now let's come back and ask, the challenge is, how do we create 50 million jobs across the African countries? How do we create 20 million manufacturing jobs is a critical challenge. And when we say jobs, normally we count when new jobs are created, but 60–70% of the jobs in the informal sector also are lost every time. So how do you manage this is a key issue. Then secondly, we have to link with the global economic structure. We are talking at a time where there is economy of scale matters a lot. So it's not that small firm producing at home, producing a shoe by, let's say, $1, while on the economy of scale, if it's going to be produced $1, it destroys its jobs. So the issue we need to see is, how do we link job creation with productivity increment is the key issue. So the first thing, coming up from the policy infrastructure, from the policy thinking, the policymakers need to think to put jobs creation as core component, but not just job creation per se, but in a way, interventions to create specific jobs. The second point I would like to comment is on this green economy or climate change issue, which Ambassador raised. And here I should first say, Africa contributes about 3.5% to global carbon emission, just 3%. While the most severely affected is Africa's agriculture. When we talk about agriculture, we have to be reminded it's agriculture being significantly affected by climate change, irregularity of rainfall, deterioration of soil, etc. So while this is the situation, but what matters is not talking about it. What matters is what actions should be taken. The first thing is, being a developing country doesn't force you to put conditions that developed economies or OECD countries must provide support in order to protect the climate. First, be it the rich countries or developing countries, we live in one single planet. We don't have another option. So which means that being a developed country or a developing country, each must contribute to protection of the climate because it's about protecting the next generations. And the second point is there is a lot that could be done by developing countries. Afforestation is not costly. Afforestation across hills and transformation of agriculture will depend also on the type of agricultural practices which also impact on climate. So the first thing we need to believe, and the problem I see among policymakers, is to see climate change and green economy as a luxury or as an agenda that could be postponed. So we have also to link it that the climate change and green economic growth can generate income, can contribute to reducing infrastructure cost. 20 years back, wind and solar energy was twice, 3 times the cost of hydropower generated energy. Now solar energy and wind is almost on par with hydropower. Even hydropower has huge risks because of the irregularity of rainfall. So the technology is being widely available, and this has an important benefit. And this could be an area where jobs could be created, like in India. India is producing solar in massive way. So the green economy is also a source of income as well. On the Agenda 23, I want to highlight that Agenda 2030 was endorsed, as we know, when MDG ended 2015. And it was a very, very ambitious, and it was the first time both developed and developing countries were united in endorsing Agenda 2030. But we are out of track now. Even before COVID, it was very clear that poverty cannot be ended by 2030. That SDG goals could not be achieved. Now, COVID has changed the complete trajectory. Economies are shrinking, contracting, jobs are being lost. So developing countries are already, it's a big blow by COVID, making it much more difficult to achieve the Agenda 2030 by after 10 years. So coming back to the point you raised and you asked, I want first to explain, I have spent my last career, more than 30 years as a policymaker, and a committed champion of industrialization for the last 30 years. And all my publications, researches focus on this topic. So for me, the issue I see is, will the next decade be a lost decade for developing countries? The central issue is, should the next decade be a lost decade? And for me, I find it from an African perspective, from developing perspective, we can't allow that, but that will be a big disaster, which we cannot foresee from now. So from the UN specialized agencies, almost all focus on universal mission, be it UNESCO, WTO, and other specialized UN agencies have universal mission. UNIDO's mission is promoting industrialization in developing countries, Asia, Africa, Latin America, transition economies. And Africa needs industrialization. Africa needs to create jobs. The best way to influence the trajectory would be ensuring that UNIDO can significantly contribute to accelerate industrialization in developing countries. And I should also highlight this, that India is an important player within UNIDO. India is a good example of developing countries, and the economic growth is also being accelerated, and it's a giant which will be emerging in the process. And I look forward that developing countries like India, China, and other emerging economies should be able to play a much more prominent role so that we can create more jobs, we can focus on carbon neutral industrialization, we can develop capability. So this is why I am now focused on UNIDO, and G77 in November put a statement that UNIDO is an important institution for developing countries, and it must be led by developing countries. And all the 55 member states of Africa Union unanimously said, we can't compete among ourselves. Let's find the best candidate who would help us to ensure that UNIDO can serve developing countries, including Africa. So this is what I look forward as a challenge.
I thank you, sir, for laying out this vision so clearly. And I'm so happy that Africa has endorsed you. And now you see the issues that you mentioned. So the WHO, the WTO are already headed by Africans. And if you come to head UNIDO, then I think you will be the spearhead to make sure that what you said about creating jobs in a sustainable manner will be implemented. And we wish you luck and good wishes from India to say that we hope that you are there, because I think a person of your vision and eminence is really what is required to do that.
Thank you.
So I'm going to move into the last round of questions. And this pertains specifically to India. So now, in order to see that the Africa Continental FTA delivers and you have better trade and investment, how do you work with a partner like India? Now, I specifically want to mention one thing. India did not join the regional comprehensive economic partnership developed in Asia. Had India joined that, the overall impact, according to an ECA study on African exports, would have been negative with regard to Asian countries who would have found it easier to trade among themselves. Now, India not being a part of that, and India having a duty-free tariff preference scheme with Africa, gives opportunities for India and Africa to work more closely together. Secondly, I think EBID has almost $1.5 billion of India's soft loans available for ECOWAS countries. I think Ethiopia has benefited to the tune of about $1 billion of soft loans. And I know TDB has been doing non-sovereign loans from India's Exim Bank to support this sector. So, sir, I begin with you again, President Tadesse. How do you see a growth of this perspective with working with India?
Well, thank you, Ambassador. And of course, we as Africans continue to be very excited about the prospects of doing more trade and investment with India on the back of the very large volumes we've seen with other Asian countries. Of course, now we know that the prospects are very serious for the next several decades in terms of what we can expect from these two giant Asian economies. I think in the case of India specifically, we've seen India come to the party in a pretty serious way. We've seen some 40 African countries receive some $11 billion of combined credit from India in the past decades. And I think cumulatively, it's been very significant, and it's grown from where it was many years ago. I think the one challenge I see going forward is linking it and tying it back to what we had said earlier on. The debt-driven development model has really reached its limits.
Yes.
And I think credit alone is going to be very challenging. And I think this is where we need to continue to encourage Indian investors to come in and take risk capital positions in Africa, right? Because the advantage that one gets from investors from middle income countries or emerging markets who have been where Africa is today is that they have a better idea of how to do it, right? I think they have the human capital over and above the funding that comes with the investment. So I think the message that should be sent out very strongly in this bilateral engagement is that India should really focus on the FDI side of things going forward. And of course, that can be complemented with credit, but the credit will be there to actually support risk capital, as opposed to driving it through G2G models, which has really left a lot to be desired. Africa has had a good run with infrastructure. We've built up very nicely, but really that infrastructure now needs to be put to good use. And that's where the real economy needs to be built on top of infrastructure. And I think this is where a good colleague, Dr. Arkaba, keeps talking about, formal sector jobs, which has to come on the back of manufacturing and industrial development. The informal sector really has serious limitations. Not that it's not good. I think livelihoods need to be supported. I think small and micro businesses also need to be supported as a way of, keeping people engaged. But I think the big message today for me is we welcome Indian entrepreneurs, Indian investors to come in and actually build businesses in the continent, either directly on their own or also in joint ventures with Africans. And I think the message is, please be smart, choose competence over and above everything else. Because I think there's been some bad experiences where Indian investors have invested and they've not always looked at the competence factor, and they've looked at more the exporting of the equipment side, which is linked to credit. And of course, the investments haven't always worked out. And that's also created a little bit of a reputational baggage for debt-driven investments. So I think I'll leave it at that for now and say that TDB is very open to facilitating, real investors who come in and who want to take risk in Africa. We will join forces and help them achieve their objectives as much as possible.
I entirely agree with you, sir. I think the G2G approach has had its day. And today it is the turn of the private sector to come and take on the risk backed by financial support. And you're right, the lines of credit today cannot be the main thing, the debt-led thing, but it should be the supporting to FDI and PPP model. I entirely agree with you. Yes. And, while we're talking of the FTA, I must tell you that last week, India signed a new comprehensive economic partnership agreement with Mauritius. And I heard the Mauritius minister repeatedly saying that, see, we are your gateway to Africa. Come and invest with us. COMESA, SADC, there we are. So, and the other one we are negotiating is with Morocco. Morocco says the same thing to us, that we are the gateway to other countries in Africa, particularly under the Africa Continental FTA. But is there a scope for India to directly work with the FTA? That also is a point which keeps rising up in my mind. But I turn to the Vice President of EBITDA. You have got a lot of experience in dealing with Exim Bank and Indian companies. How do you see the future as we move from what President Tadesse said, from a G2G to a more private sector-led approach?
Many thanks, Ambassador. Again, many thanks to President Matsu and Dr. Akebe. Today, just look at what happened in the last 15 to 20 years. In 2017, 2018, the total trade volume between India and Africa was around $63 billion, compared to $185 billion with China.
Yes.
But as you rightly said it, all this flow has been mainly a G2G flow. Today, if I just benchmark that $63 billion to the $185 billion, there is an amazing opportunity for private sector, global private sector companies like Tata, like Mahindra, like Indorama, to come and do something very, very, very unique, which is feeding what Africans need by beneficiating locally and by being a fully and locally global companies and being relevant. Today, when you go to ICS in Senegal, people, even that people, the local people don't even know that Mahindra, Indorama is behind. They still the local company. And I really encourage what President Atmatsu said is bringing global Indian companies to come to feed the gap, which is, I would say, not only infrastructure, building silos, building storage capacity, building integrated value chain. Let me just give you one simple example of how problems can be solved. Burkina Faso produce a lot of cattle. They export live cattle to Ivory Coast. When I last week, when I met the Minister of Finance of Burkina Faso, he told me, I just need a good abattoir and a good cold room storage.
Mm-hmm.
These are opportunities that Indian companies can grab by partnering with local, maybe using the experience of Indian bank and developmental partners like us and Trade and Development Bank. And I think that there is an amazing opportunity for the large local corporate, Indian corporates, to come, beneficiate cashew, beneficiate cotton to produce textile, play a very important role in the logistic, in the transport and logistic. And your Tata buses, your Tata trucks are known to be very resistant in rural areas. And these are opportunities that I strongly recommend the Indian private companies to come and monetize in Africa, working with Africans. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I absolutely adore your passion for India, which I have heard from you on several occasions. So you, sir, really are my favorite person because you always give India such an importance. And what I like about you is, you always talk about India and China, but not in comparison. You simply put it as a target. And we in India like to believe that China does more in Africa, but perhaps India does better. And that is something that I keep working on. And I hope that this remains true. For the final word of this panel, I revert to Ato Arkebe. You, sir, have contributed so much to the development of your country and the continent. And God willing, you will do more in the future. How do you see India as a partner of Africa in the years ahead?
Thank you, Ambassador. The first thing we need to highlight is the positive element. India-Africa Cooperation Platform emerged, if I'm not wrong, in the last decade.
Mm-hmm.
And there has been few summits, and we'll be having 2021 summit also, I think, planned in Africa. So I see this progress quite positive. And the India-Africa Cooperation Platform is among the top 3 platforms currently. So it's not ineffective, it's effective. So we need to highlight this point. The second thing we need to see is India, although it has industrial capacity and is an emerging economy, we also need to consider that it has also its own challenges at home. It needs to create jobs at home. Policies need to encourage that, and it's also putting effort to industrialize and to grow. So we cannot look at India like donor. So that's why the first thing I would like to start is from the cooperative side, how can, on the education front, India and African countries collaborate? India has put investment in education, and there are also world-class schools and institutions. So one key issue would be on the human capital development aspect, what can be done? This is an area that have not been fully exploited. We usually talk, when we look at cooperation, about finance. But for me, it's not finance that is going to be critical even between Europe and Africa. The second aspect is the policy learning. India is not a perfect country in terms of policy making. It has its own challenges, But in many areas, there are extraordinary good lessons. When we started to put strategy on development of pharmaceutical industry from the world, many countries, the government chose India as one of the best examples, because India, within the framework of the patent intellectual property arrangement, has been able to grow pharma industry and to be one of the major leading exporters. Chemical industry, India has done an excellent job. So the second point we need to look is in a very selected manner where policy engagement, know-how transfer can be developed, because policy know-how matters a lot more than money. Because if you can learn from mistakes made in India, from the best experience in India, which means that we don't need to repeat the mistakes. So the second area is the policy learning. The third aspect is infrastructure. In terms of infrastructure, what we need to explore is innovative way of financing of infrastructure. For instance, solar panels, leading solar panel manufacturers can come in Africa and can be engaged in industrial parks. They can cover all the roofs and they can charge and give the service. While when it's a loan structure, there is a lot of negotiation and the flexibility from African side as well as from Indian side will also be a constraint. So a critical issue here will be to identify areas, targeted areas where this collaboration can make a difference, because any collaboration has to be a win-win. It's not one side. So where innovative way of infrastructure is the key area we need to focus, because the conventional loan issue, India's capacity is limited and Africa's capacity of observing additional debt is also constrained. So this is a third aspect. The fourth aspect is trade. I don't think the trade between India and Africa, there is a potential. I know that where India and some African countries, there are, for instance, where tariff duties has been removed from India's side. So on the trade side, we need not just about making it free in terms of tariff, but coming up with how to remove the restrictions, how to ensure that the trade volume could grow. I don't see the current trade volume as very low. It's quite significant, because even if it's 7%, which shows us it can grow faster. It can be double digit within a few years. So what we need to work on is on the trade side, we need to target and work. And this is absolutely important, the trade component. The fifth one is the productive investment. From investment certificates, about 11 or 12% of investment certificates in the last 15 years are from India. So 11, 12% is not small amount. And what, as I mentioned earlier, what I have seen is many Indian companies, when they operate overseas, they take risk, they are resilient, they integrate with the community. That has been the advantage. And here what we need to do is, what about if we target the companies in every sector? Because the key issue is when they come here, they will face more constraints. And how do we address these constraints? What incentive can give the Indian government to these companies? And the more capable they are, the bigger they are, it means they will be able to cope with the crisis they will be facing. If they are too small, they will not be able to survive the difficulties they will be facing. So here, especially the industrial parks approach, where the government or the private sector can develop, will be very useful. We have also to target companies. Coming back to the other issue, which is what did you say? The India, Morocco, or Mauritius gateway. I mean, these are all abstract issues because I don't think investors will go to Mauritius and come to Addis Ababa. Addis Ababa to Mumbai is just 3-4 hours. So they are not going to go to Mauritius or to Morocco. Maybe the financial platform in Mauritius might be helpful, but the best way to see is how can Ethiopian Airlines flies to India? If I'm not wrong, it has flights to Mumbai, to New Delhi, to Chennai, many places. And this is just one of the most attractive corridors because the shortest path, the shortest distance between India and Africa is between India and Addis Ababa. It's obvious, but this doesn't mean anything. This will increase traffic. The more flights are promoted, not only to New Delhi, Mumbai, but to other hubs, it will encourage more investors to come. And we need to identify the constraints. We need to work on how we create the basic conditions. Some of the investment climate issues could be made in place. But if there is no energy, what investment can be made? No, nothing. If there is bad telecom system, still they will have difficulties. So there are conditions. If there is no human capital that can be made available easily in an accessible way, then it will be constrained. So the best approach would be to do researches, and think tanks can play an important role in this area, identify sector by sector. This will be very useful. And I also would like to highlight, there are many cooperation platforms with Africa. There's the European Union Africa platform, France Africa, TCAD between Japan and Africa, FOCAC, and also Turkey Africa. My suggestion would be, it's good for India to look at how these partnerships are working, what new instruments they are using, what are the weaknesses, what are the good lessons, and this will help us to develop the collaboration platform, because that institutional platform is absolutely important. So I would advise, we don't need to compare, but studying how these platforms are working will be ultimately, will be very, very useful. So I've always been encouraging Indian companies. I'm always impressed because they can easily adapt in this continent because they know they take risks. So there is huge potential. And one key element here is, does the government of India continue to look at this partnership in a strategic manner? So this is a homework for Indian government. Is there a potential to make it bigger? Is there a potential to make it more effective? And from the Pan-African side, I know that there is an appetite. I know that there is interest from the many African countries, but I believe more should be done on the Indian side to make this cooperation bigger and to make it more sustainable. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, sir. You have given me so much homework.
Yeah.
So I am going to promise you that I will convey this. And I thank my other panelists and you, sir, for giving us such a wonderful debate today with so many ideas coming up that we now know where to focus. And I know that I will always have your support to pursue this agenda. I can only promise you the support of Sankalp Africa Summit to pursue this with you. I thank you all for your participation today. You deeply honored us, Ato Tadese, Ato Arkebe, and Mr. Diane, Dr. Diane, for being with us today. Thank you very much for your time and your intellectual input.